So this is the second part of the interview that I had with Paul. Same kind of idea, just kind of a podcast format with random gameplay. If you guys missed the previous section, which talked about new mercs and just general stuff, check the previous video from yesterday. But I hope you end up enjoying it. If you want to see more interviews with Paul, let me know with a comment, a like, and subscribe if you have not. You look fantastic.
I'm a doctor.
A question that a lot of people always ask me is in terms of excess coins. So we talked about it last time, but has it ever been considered to do like a I don't know, like a currency change or something along like ratio where, like, for instance, I have 100 common coins, I can get 1 epic coin or something, or sorry, 100 rare coins, I get 1 epic coin.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's tons of considerations that we talked about even before release of like how we want to handle excess coins and when players get there. And yeah, so we talked about a lot of different solutions, and one of those was possibly doing coin conversions or some type of system like that.
Okay, awesome. I'm sure a lot of people will be very excited about that.
Yeah, like I said, it's one of the things we talked about. There's probably multiple things. So one of the things I realized when I was talking and seeing people kind of like was like, hey, Paul said this. I was like, well, that's not exactly what I said, right? And so people kind of hear what they want to hear. And so I just want to make sure that, you know, people don't get the wrong expectations set up about which way or what we're doing with anything. I'll be very crystal clear. But I also realize that that's hard. So yeah. I'll just keep on trying to correct it whenever I can. Because, like, you know, when I was talking about the speed ties, I'm still, you know, I would love the community's help on this, because I feel like, oh, I was trying to over communicate. It's like, hey, okay, this is how the system works. And there was a bug. So, you know, I wanted to be clear that there was a bug and why people were seeing different results. And then when I sometimes I hop on stream or hop on Discord, and then I see people trying to explain the speed system to someone else. And it's so like, wait, that's not what I said at all. That's not how it works. And it's like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have, like, maybe I should just like stuck the TLDR at the top and just made that the headline. Maybe I shouldn't have gone too into detail, because then, yeah, it's I'm starting to realize how tough it is to communicate in a clear way.
Yes.
And get the info correctly to everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I'm gonna, just from being a content creator for so long, if you say something and people think that you said something different, you are not going to live that down. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, you know, it just spreads like wildfire, right? Because as soon as one person starts parroting it,
also
it just kind of multiplies.
One of the other issues is, like, if you don't say something, then people will assume that, like, that's what you're focusing on. So for instance, I literally just said in chat something like 100 to 1 is, and then someone in chat wrote 100 to 1 is ridiculous. What the fuck? Like, just to give you an example, right? Like, this prime example. I'm not attacking you, Montez. I'm just making that as an example. So yeah, it's something like you're just gonna have to get used to it, and like you can only respond to so many people, right, before like you gotta do what you gotta do or whatever, right? So
yeah, I do try to stress that, like, a non-answer isn't a confirmation, because like one of the traps I don't want to get into that the community starts being is like, oh, Paul didn't respond to this, or the dev team didn't respond to this, so it must be the case that this is true or something like that. Yeah, and the truth of the matter is, I don't have time to respond to every possible theory or speculation. And then, yeah, if I get into the habit of, you know, saying no to everything, and then the one time I don't say no, then it's like, well, he didn't respond to this, so it's obviously the case. Right? Yeah. It's like, yeah. But yeah, it's just part of the game, I guess, and just have to live with it.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure we got everything for this. Could we get attacking blues? Is that a design you guys are looking into?
Yes.
All right,
I mean, we have Guff, right?
Yeah, we do have Guff, yeah.
We will have more attacking blues.
Hey, awesome. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have caster greens, caster, like, you know, range spells, so it's red.
God.
Yeah, you'll have a range of it. Like, most of the, you know, protectors and fighters will still be in like the physical space, but, you know, every once in a while, you know, like, look at Malfurion, right? He's a caster red.
Was there, this is probably like a personal one, but is there a design for a protector to defend against casting abilities?
Yeah, I think so, right? I think that's one of the things I would be interested to hear what the community is. I think the space we were playing around was like more specific to a spell school, right? And an elemental school. Like fire or stuff like that, right? So like, hey, Or is it better to have like something that is more wide, right? We call this narrow and wide, right? Like, hey, do we want like a wide answer to like to blues or like to like caster type of thing? You know, taunt is a pretty wide um counter to any kind of physical attack type stuff. You know, do we want that for like things that are ranged? Like, how much does it change the game? How much does it let players do things, right? Like taunt is strong, but you know, there's a way to get around that. But like, I think if you had something like spell taunt or spell immunity, I think that character gets played all the time, right?
That's fair. Yeah, that's very fair. Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's what you know, we haven't really play tested too much with that type of mechanic. We have talked about that mechanic of what it would be fun to do, and it's probably on us to find a more halfway space of like letting you control, you know, and direct damage from like range abilities without just like completely shut down that whole type of like, well, the answer to taunts is to do range, and then you know, I think Blessing of Sacrifice is actually one of the scary abilities for us. It's just like it's a ability that just says, hey, I'm gonna protect a guy, period. And that's actually what made like Illidan so strong in internal testing, was the ability that it's just like, well, I know these characters are gonna ramp, and so let me like put them in kill range or actually kill them, right? But then you have abilities like Blessing of Sacrifice that just says no, right? And there's literally like no answer to, okay, well, what do I do about Blessing of Sacrifice? You just have to like, well, that's what he's doing, and I have to play for the next turn, right? So yeah, that's scary stuff.
Yeah, I guess it is harder to design. But like for me personally, I don't think Cornelius is necessarily a problem just because of the fact that he's not inherently a very offensive character. Like he is straight defense, right? Like his attack is very meh. So like you did a huge trade-off of like making him a super defensive protector with no offensive abilities, right? So when you have something...
Right, it also depends on how fast characters are ramping, right? We had more ramping tools, right? It's just like, hey, cool, if things are ramping really fast, denying a turn where you can like actually put a dent into things, like you can run away with games. So it's two halves of the same problem, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something we're trying to careful like of not doing that, because one of the gameplays we don't want to have is like a starting three kind of like running away with the whole games.
So we kind of talked about this in like DMs a while ago with Gruul, how like Gruul is really interesting because he kind of hard counters Diablo straight up if you get it in the right circumstance, but in other circumstances he's not like super great, right? So, but you also don't want a character that just completely shuts down exactly what your comp's doing, because then it really ruins the fun. But we also talked about how like in Mercenaries though, because there's no draw RNG or there's no like I need to get this card before they get the combo off, you get to plan out your turns, right? So you are technically rewarded for putting something that counters a metagame comp, right? So that Gruul...
Yeah. It's very feast famine, right? It's just like if you hit it, you know, like, you know, you look at like classic, like what was, oh my god, I haven't played standard in so long, but like, you know, anti-Murlocs, like, hey, you ate his Murloc, and, you know, right, and you swung the
Hunger
turn.
Crab, that's what it's called.
And so that's a little bit, it's pretty polarizing in Mercenaries, which is not great. It's great for like more formatted in tournament play, but it's probably not feels too good to be like, oh cool, I was running dragons and then you just Gruul, right? I think it feels worse when it's in the frontline, like frontline stuff. You know, like when you look at Gruul and the fire resist against Diablo, it's just like, yeah, it stops it, but you know, you have to put it at the right time, right? And so I think that's one of the advantages of Mercs. It's like, hey, even at the counter, they have to be on the board at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Unless we do something like start a game, give all your Mercs plus fire resist, and that's probably a design we'll never do, right? Because that's just like, hey.
No, that,
yeah. So yeah, there isn't any RNG component, draw energy, but there is timing component of like when you put Diablo. So like, hey, let's say you know Gruul is running everywhere and is actually playing pretty heavily into the meta to counter all the Diablos.
Yeah.
You know, then you just play Diablo first, right? And so you don't ever get them a chance, and then you force them to say, hey, if you're countering me, and you're gonna have to guess if I'm going to commit Diablo now or later. Because if I put Diablo first, and you know, cool, I did my damage and utility with Diablo, then you're just like your Gruul's now kind of dead, right? It's just like, oh, what else is it gonna do?
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, okay. So I guess is it considered feels bad if like you get countered? Is that like the idea you guys have for design? Because if I'm the person who's countering Diablo per se and I hit the tech at the exact same time, like that feels really rewarding, right? And I guess that's just polarization in general. But
yeah, right. That's just the rewarding. But the thing is, like, it's designing in ways. It's like, okay, even in these matchups, and you can make the argument with ways like, well, Gruul's not a great counter to Diablo because obviously Gruul isn't everywhere right now, right? And Diablo is everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. But the reason that is because Diablo still has APOC, right? He still has other options.
Yeah,
right?
that's
and
fair.
So the goal is to like, hey, design counters that are maybe shuts down a specific tactic or maybe only one ability of the whole thing, right? I think Gruul is actually more scary as a, hey, it's anti-dragon, and so I really can't play around it. I'm always going to be a dragon, and that's it. It's just like he's going to do whatever he's going to do, and I can't have any options to kind of mitigate that. And I think those are the scary ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hard. Yeah, well, I guess you're entirely right because like if you get destroyed just by one single mercenary, it feels horrible. Like it really does. So designing counters without going into that spot is probably like the best thing, but that's a really hard thing to do. So I don't envy your job.
Yeah. Designing counters that like touches like a wide thing, like designing an anti-fire, anti-dragon. It's like designing a counter to one character. That's fine. Or you're trading 1-to-1. And if you built your whole team around that one character, it's like okay, they got to pay off. But if like fire resist was like +10 and it just fire teams were in the meta and then you just play Gruul and then 3 of my characters are now useless. Yeah. Then that feels pretty bad, right? Yeah.
No, for sure. Okay, someone had a really good question, and I think this is really cool. What are your thoughts on like a counterspell ability? Like
yeah, so we actually had counterspell. So one was deciding like how counterspell works, right? It's just like counterspell is the hey. It's so wide. It's going to be good at everything, right? It's like
very true. Yeah. Very good ability.
And I'm curious what the community thinks. What is a spell in Mercenaries? If we had an ability that counterspells, does it counter attacks as well?
I wouldn't. So I would, if you're like asking me specifically, I think about the secret and standard, right? So attacking the mage does not do anything, but the second you play a casting ability, then it gets countered. So like Vol'jin's AOE would be a spell. But like Illidan attacking you is not a spell. That would be the. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. I think that's most people's like natural kind of tendency as well. I think we would have to do some UI help to say, hey, cool, and label the abilities as what is a spell and what isn't a spell.
Yeah.
Right. You have some random abilities like Rathion's attack, right, where it's just like, hey, it doesn't attack, but it also does damage. Does that count as a spell? Right, because like, hey, if you have a demon, it does like 7 random damage to something else. Like,
yeah, I guess that's fair. Yeah, you would have to have like a concrete definition of what a spell actually is, for sure.
Yeah, like how would we label that ability? Is that a spell ability or is that an attack ability? Because we at one point internally we did have, attack as a ability type. Right? You have like fire type, fell type and stuff like that. And one of the things we tried to make sure people understood how attack works and that it gets blocked by taunt. And that you take return damage was like labeling attack. It actually didn't work out so well. People still didn't get there until we bolded the attack and make it a keyword that it was a little bit more obvious.
Yeah.
So so there's something like that, but there's also design challenges. Like how do you design a counter ability that isn't always used? Like is it a
very true.
Slow speed? Right, where it's like, counter the next ability and gives the opponent the option to choose who gets counter, or is it like something like a 2-speed counter is like counter the next ability?
That's especially the other question you have to ask yourself too is like, if the character dies, does the counter still proc or not, right?
Yeah, but chances are the character's not going to die because it's
true. Yeah,
it's like you can't do it, right? So there actually is some kind of like design, like it's hard to carve out the right design space for that ability.
Yes, very hard.
But yeah, because it's so wide. I think if we were going to do it, some of the things we talked about is like designing it more towards specific things, like either like counter the next fire spell.
Yeah, that could work.
Right, or counter a spell, or hey, when you cast a spell, the next maybe it's like, hey, every time an opponent uses a fire ability, gain +10 fire resist for the turn. Or it's like, oh, okay, cool. You get the first one off, but the subsequent combo fires or mini, right?
Yeah. No, it's definitely, that's, I mean, it would be a really cool ability to have, but yeah, you're right. It would be a character that would probably be used quite literally in everything because countering a spell is really good.
Yeah. And so yeah, my guess is that if we did it, it would have to be like a 10 speed that says, hey, counter the next spell, right? And so the player gets the next turn to kind of figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask you 2 more questions and then we can play some games.
Yeah.
Just to make it, so actually I'm gonna make it 3 because this is a part 2 to the one we just had. What about a cleanse ability? So
like a silence type ability?
No, I was thinking more like, so like Karen stomps you, and you cleanse the debuff on it.
Yeah, I think you can. I think to me that still falls on silence because silence can go both ways.
I guess that's fair. Yeah, true. Okay.
Right. So you can have a full silence just removes all buffs, debuffs, and then you can have one that just removes all buff, and then one that removes all debuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I could see a world where that exists. I think that's something we didn't want it to do in the starting set, just yet, just to see how the game space was going to be played and what players actually did with the mercenaries. But yeah, silence, debuffing, or cleansing, I guess is the right term. Is I think offensive and defensive cleansing.
Okay. What about like an amalgam? Amalgam? I can't say that word. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. The one that would be casters,
like
fighters.
multi-race,
yeah,
stuff
so
like that.
That would be interesting because they would take critical damage from everything, but they would also do critical damage.
Oh, you mean just from rolls, from having multi-rolls?
I think rolls, yes.
Yeah,
not just
not multiple like tribal.
Not tribal, yeah, sorry. Like I mean, like I guess you could do it for both. I think I would assume what you're thinking about would already be a case. I would think that would cross your guys' mind for sure.
Yeah, we talked about maybe doing dual roles, neutral roles.
Neutral roles.
You know, right? I don't think that's something that is. It's one of the things is like, hey, sometimes you have to let the game mode breathe a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
And then do those stuff because then what happens is, one there's lower kind of like, if you don't have time to kind of appreciate the basic mechanics, and then you kind of throw in like some of these like crazier things. One, you lose the impact of it feeling novel and crazy because that's just part of the standard set of mercenaries, right? And so one is like a timing and impactful thing, but two is it's a forever problem thing, right? It's just like once you design a kind of like Swiss Army knife character, it's still like in the counter space spell space that we were talking about, right? Then it's a forever problem. And then that now is a new way of how mercenaries is played, right? Just like those things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Definitely. Okay.
Start with smaller complexities, and then we can add complexity over time.
Yeah. So I guess this is probably gonna be the last one. I was gonna ask you, are you guys ever gonna make a new color? Like, so there's fighter, protectors, casters. Is there ever gonna be a fourth one? Well, like I guess neutral is technically one, but did that ever cross your guys' mind? So I know like you can say this game is almost like rock paper scissors in a sense because casters beat protectors, so on and so forth. But like adding the fourth dimension of characters.
Well, I think there's actually a lot of interesting aspects to this conversation. Have we talked about it? Yes. Are we likely to do it? No.
Okay.
At least not in the immediate term. Like I said, this is one of the bigger changes if we ever do it. That changes like, hey, what Mercenaries feels like, right? And so like, let's see what the base and standard kind of like quote unquote elementary Mercenaries mode feels like first before we take it into hyperdrive. But yeah, this is something we talked about. You know, I think if you do one extra roll, what would it be? And how does it interact with all the other colors, right? Or other rolls?
Yeah, you'd have to kind of maybe redesign it.
Yeah, so one is you just redesign everything and everyone gets new color rolls, right? And it'd just be like, and that would be your equivalent to like your big like reset Hall of Fame. Just like, well, now Maltherian is blue red, or you can do a lot of different things. Like I think there's a execution side to it too. It's just like, well, do you slowly, if you wanted to do a new color, do you do one new color and then that's just what it is, or do you have to do a bunch of them at the same time, right? Do you have to release like 20 at the same time? And also like, you know, how does it interact with the other colors? Did you get all of a sudden like, is it like, does it beat fighters and protectors but lose to casters, or like, you know, it's this weird unsymmetric thing. I think if you were gonna do new roles, you would have to do at least 2, right? And then you would do like a pentagon cross system where each role has two weaknesses, right?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
And you do that, or you do what some other dudes where it's like, hey, they're neutral to everyone else, but it's like black and white. They're strong against it. They're like shadow darkness, right? So you have your elementals, and then you have your light darkness side, right? And you could do it that way, right? And so there's actually quite a bit of interesting space of like wanting to do there, but it's just like
it's hard all the time.
It's hard, but it's also there's other priorities to kind of solve first, and there's still tons of like individual merc design space to kind of tap into.
Yeah,
where we
sure,
don't need to do like a big systematic thing just yet.
Yeah. Yeah, the undertaking that you just showcased to us would be insane. Definitely.
Yeah, because like originally Mercenary started as the 10 classes, right? You had your rogues, demon hunters, right? And then so we did this exercise. We sent around like, okay, cool. These are the 10 classes in Mercenaries, and there's a weakness table to it. And we sent out the weakness table and asked everyone to fill out what they think what the weakness table was. And it's just like, no one came up with closely remotely to the same answer. Yeah. And like, it's like, oh, warrior beats rogues, right? And rogues beats mages, and then what about warlocks? Like who? And then some people like went like, well, in WoW this class beats this class, but in Hearthstone, so. And who couldn't remember that? It's a little too insane. For sure. But that's how it started off as. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. Everyone had a class.
That's hilarious. Sure. Okay, one last small little question. This is a concern that I brought up in a lot of my chat, and someone just brought this up right now. So one of the issues that I have with Diablo personally is that he really punishes summons, but like a lot.
He punishes go whites.
Well, not even that. Like it's more like, so let's say I'm Sourfang and I summon the orc, whatever his name is. Not only is that an extra 10 life for Diablo, but he also gets the extra 6 damage or 12 damage because he did not actually act this turn.
Right.
Has there been any consideration to change how that fundamentally works?
I don't know. I could bring it back to the team. I don't think that's something we've talked about of like, hey, I think the best use case is Samaro's images, right? You do the image, and you're like, cool, but then now he gets an extra stomp because the images technically didn't act.
Yeah.
Like, he got forced to attack. Or even something like, Jaraxxus' summons, or even like War Elementals and stuff like that, they didn't act. I think this is more of like, hey, balance-wise, I think I imagine the design team would want to change it, just like, hey, this would take Diablo down a notch. But I think it comes down to like, hey, what's more important to us, the balance side versus like the expectations of how things work, right? Like imagine in a world that it didn't count for that, I think a lot of players would be like, well, it didn't act it. Why didn't I get that extra stomp, right? And so we have to weigh between those two costs of like, oh, what is the general public understanding and what are the expectations versus like the balance concerns, right? And I think if it's a balance concerns, I think there are other ways to address it as well. But yeah, I'll bring it back to the team. I think those are the considerations to think about if we were going to make a change. I'll see what they think about it. And see.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, because I think like for a lot of people, like one of the issues is like you can't really spawn anything later in the game once Diablo's on the board because you get punished so hard for it. And like the addition of Cookie is a really good example of this, how you just spawn a fish and then Diablo gets an extra proc and you're like, okay, like, well, I couldn't really do anything against that. And I'm not saying that's like a balance thing at all, but I could see a lot of people being like, this is like not great for the game because it really punishes you for summoning things later when Diablo comes out. So
yeah, it's actually funny when we first did Mercenaries, we had a lot more summon play, a lot more minion play that because we felt like, hey, it changes the board state. You're not always playing against 3v3. This was before like the damage got ramped up and the time to kill was higher or lower, right? And we actually like, when I talked earlier about like the buff changes that we made, like the scariest changes to us was the Jaraxxus changes. Because we didn't want to have mercenaries in this kind of attrition war of like summoning a lot of stuff and slowing the game down, right? We want to move the game forward.
Yeah, that's fair.
A lot, and so in a way, Diablo was initially designed to make sure that was never a problem. It was designed to like, hey, make it make sure that going wide was could never be too strong because Diablo existed. But I think Diablo ended up being stronger for other reasons outside of that, because like Karen got introduced and other speed control elements like Rarran and stuff like that got introduced. So yeah, but I'll bring it back to the design team and see what they think about that. But like, hey.
Okay. All right, Paul. Appreciate all the questions and answers.
But I saw someone in chat ask like, hey, since we're talking about Diablo, are there going to be more abilities in this set of mercenaries that that reward you for going last? And I will say yes.
Oh, that's really okay. It's like the reverse Diablo.
Yeah, reverse Diablo.
Who's the reverse Diablo? just as a design, who is the reverse Diablo?
I mean, it could be like
that's interesting.
Just kind of talk like maybe like an ice lord or something, right?
Oh,
like you were gonna do it, right? Like, hey, going really slow. Something, you know, like a water elemental or
yeah. Okay. Oh man, I want to.
Decker King. Yeah, Decker King's very good.
I want to ask way more stuff about new mercenaries, but probably shouldn't. So go for it.
I'll talk to you offline.
Okay.
About that. Yeah,
offline, Pog. All right.